My name is Denise Hubble, and I'm adding a bit of audio to our general A&P PowerPoints. I'm excited to be participating in this project, and I would like to try to add some relevance to the topic and add in some clinical experience along the way to kind of keep it interesting. But it is interesting on its own as well. We're going to learn all about how the human body is made and how it works. And once we understand all of that really well, you're later on in your courses you're going to learn about how diseases can affect the body, and hopefully that helps you understand that this course is fundamental in your further learning about the human body. The anatomy is the structure of the body, how it's made up physically, and the term gross anatomy, it's looking at anatomy that we can see with the naked eye. Physiology is how the body works. For example, in the lungs, we have tiny air sacs. We're going to call those alveoli now. And those alveoli have very, very thin walls. It allows them to have gas exchange. So oxygen and carbon dioxide can exchange readily across the alveoli because the walls are so thin. This helps you understand that the way that a structure works depends a lot on the shape and the build of the structure. So physiology depends on the anatomy. We're going to look at 6 levels of structural organization, starting with the atom and going all the way up to the human organism. I know you're going to be excited about chemistry. We're going to be teaching that in the next lecture. Starting off, we have atoms that combine together to form molecules, and then cells are made up of these small molecules, and multiple cells working together, multiple types of cells working together, are tissues. And then when we put lots of different types of tissues together, we get an organ, and when we get many organs working together, we call that an organ system, like cardiovascular system. And then when we put all these body systems together, we get the human organism. And start to talk about some of our organ systems. One important system is the integumentary system, also known as the skin. There's going to be a whole PowerPoint on this a little later. But just an overview of it and some of the functions of it. It forms our entire wrapping, our whole body covering. It also includes things that extend from the skin, like hair and fingernails. It makes us waterproof. In fact, if you have a severe burn, one of the things that happens is a lot of fluids are lost because the skin does not have its integrity anymore. So we know that one of the jobs of the skin is to keep us waterproof. And it helps to cushion us from bumps, for example. It allows the production of vitamin D if we expose our skin to sunlight, and it allows the excretion of some salts in perspiration. We can control our body temperature somewhat with our skin. We'll notice, for example, if we set the thermostat really high in our room, our skin is going to become red or flushed because we're going to have a lot of blood vessels in the skin open up a lot so that we can bring a lot of blood to the surface of the skin to allow the heat to dissipate or leave our body. Also, we have nerve endings in our skin so that we can feel what's going on and respond to that appropriately. The skeletal system is made up mostly of bones, but it also includes supportive structures like cartilage and ligaments and joints. And we know that our muscles attach to our skeleton to permit movement, and also that the skeletal system gives us structure. What would we look like without our skeletal system? We would be just little mud puddles. It protects our vital organs. Think about your skull and how that is such a strong enclosure for your brain, because your brain is a delicate soft tissue and it needs to be protected. Another great example of that is your rib cage surrounding your lungs and heart to try to protect these vital organs. It's very interesting that the skeletal system also is involved with blood cell formation. That's where blood cells are produced, is inside of our bones. And we store minerals there, like calcium, for example. Some of the functions of the muscular system are to allow movement, so we can move around and pick things up. And it is because the muscles are attached to the bones and they work together for this. The nervous system is an amazing body system. It is like in your car, you have sensors that can pick up on problems with your car, like perhaps tire pressure sensors. That information would be brought to the computer of your car where decisions are made, and then changes can be made, sometimes automatic from that computer. A similar idea happens with our nervous system. It has sensors basically which can detect changes, so sensory receptors detect changes in the body, send messages up to the central nervous system, which is the brain and the spinal cord, and then basically a decision is made about what to do, and then there are signals sent back out to the muscles and glands of the body to make a change. Fascinated by the endocrine system. It is made up of glands spread around our body. An example would be the thyroid gland. These glands secrete hormones which float around the body by way of the bloodstream, and they have impacts throughout the body. Some of these impacts include growth, reproduction, and how nutrients are used, like glucose, but it has many other roles as well. We're going to be learning about the cardiovascular system in great detail. It includes the heart that acts like a pump. It includes vessels like arteries, veins, and capillaries, for example, and it includes blood that gets moved around. So that makes up our cardiovascular system, and some of the roles of it would be to transport oxygen and carbon dioxide, so oxygen to the cells, carbon dioxide away from the cells and up to the lungs and heart, distribute nutrients and hormones. Also, the blood plays an important role in fighting off invaders like microorganisms that shouldn't be in our body. It uses things like white blood cells in the blood in order to fight off these invaders. The lymphatic system is amazing. It's like drain tile around the house, around your house, to pick up excess fluid. And that's exactly what your lymphatic system does. It picks up excess fluid from all over the body and returns it to the bloodstream. Even better than that, though, it has tiny filters called lymph nodes, and it has cells within those lymph nodes which can analyze what is in the fluid. And if there's anything that's potentially dangerous, it'll try to deal with it. For example, cancer cells or microorganisms. Respiratory system has all to do with our breathing and bringing in oxygen and removing carbon dioxide. It's a fascinating system involving, of course, the lungs, but also airways like the trachea and bronchi. The digestive system is also known as the gastrointestinal system, and of course this is the system in which we take in food, we digest it into very small parts, and then we absorb those particles into our bloodstream. The urinary system is also known as the renal system or the kidneys. It's actually made up of the kidneys, the urinary bladder, and some tubings, ureters and urethra. The job of the urinary system is to eliminate some waste products from our body, such as nitrogenous waste, and very importantly, to try to maintain a stable pH. Our body wants to have a pH of 7.35 to 7.45, and our lungs and kidneys will work together to try to achieve that. Also, the kidneys are involved with regulating a normal level of water and electrolytes and a normal blood pressure, and they work hard at this job. The reproductive system, of course, is different in males versus females. In males, it consists of things like the testes, the scrotum, the penis, and some other glands, and a duct system. The overall goal here is to produce and deliver sperm to the exterior of the body. In females, ovaries produce eggs, and the uterus is the site for where a fetus will grow and develop. Few slides address all of the necessary functions we need for life. One thing, we need to have a boundary which keeps us contained. We need to have the ability for movement and to move things through our body like food through our gastrointestinal system. We need to be able to sense changes and to react to them, to digest foods and absorb them. Also, there are lots of different chemical reactions going on in the body. We need those. They are termed metabolism. And then we need to be able to excrete waste, for example, to be able to reproduce, and we need to be able to grow. A couple slides talk about what we need in order to survive. We all know that we need nutrients for energy. It's going to be in the form of ATP. And we need nutrients in order to build things within our cells. The types of nutrients we need are carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, vitamins, and minerals. And then we need oxygen, of course. And we need water, and we need to be able to maintain a normal body temperature, that our body doesn't get too cold or too warm, and that we're in a normal atmospheric pressure. This is such a great image of how some of our body systems work together. On the left, we see the digestive system, that where food is taken in, digested down, and then absorbed as nutrients. And in the middle, we see the cardiovascular system with that heart that's a pump, the pipes are the vessels, and the blood is within the pipes. This is a transport system, and it allows things like glucose to be delivered to all the cells in the body. On the top right, we see the respiratory system, which the main goal is to bring oxygen in and to excrete carbon dioxide. And the bottom right, we see the kidneys and the urinary system, and we know that their goal is to excrete waste and excess fluid. We're going to chat about some terminology we use when we talk about anatomy. We use special terminology so that we can communicate with one another at the bedside and understand what part of the body we're referring to. So that's the reason for learning all of this. So let's start with the anatomical position. The anatomical position is kind of a standardized position that we can study the body in, where we're looking at the patient from the anterior. The patient is standing upright and their feet are about shoulder width apart. Their arms are hanging down and their palms are facing forward. The thumbs are facing outwards. This is called the anatomical position. Here are some directional terms that are super important. I'll be using this terminology throughout the course, so it's very important to figure this out and really understand what this means. We used to use the term TOP before you started respiratory therapy or nursing or med lab. Or any program that you're in, you may have used the term top. From now on, we're going to use the term superior. That's the proper way to talk about toward the head or the upper part of the structure or above something. Perhaps we want to say that the kneecap is superior to the foot, as an example. Inferior is the opposite. It means below. Anterior is the front of the body, also known as ventral, and posterior is the dorsal portion of the body, or behind. Again, we'll use these terms all the time, so anterior is front, and posterior is back. Oh, no. The term medial means more towards the midline of the body, and lateral is the opposite of that. It's more away from the midline of the body. The reason why we would use these terms, maybe for example, we're auscultating a patient's lungs. We're listening with our stethoscope to the patient's lungs, and we're working with a colleague, and I'm trying to direct them to place their stethoscope in a different position. I may use these terms medial or lateral. Intermediate means between a more medial and a more lateral structure, so kind of in between those. A surgeon may be describing this during surgery to a colleague or a peer that they want an incision made intermediate. That would be in between medial and lateral. The term proximal we use all the time. Proximal means close to the origin of the body part or the point of attachment of a limb. We will even use the term proximal when we talk about our equipment. For example, we may have a ventilator and we may have a piece of that ventilator or part of that ventilator that needs to be proximal to the ventilator, that means close to the ventilator, as opposed to distal is far away. On the body, distal is far away from the core of the body. So proximal is close, distal is far away. For example, my finger is distal to my elbow. The terms superficial and deep are opposite. Superficial is just barely below the skin of a patient. Deep is deeper into the body. This is really useful if you're being taught how to do a procedure. Perhaps your preceptor would like you to insert a needle more deeply into the tissue, then that's termed deep. But if they feel that it shouldn't be as deep, they may ask you to take the needle out a little bit and be more superficial. If you ever have the opportunity to go to the morgue to learn about anatomy, the cadavers may be cut along these types of lines. Here we're calling them imaginary lines, but actually these cadavers can be cut in this way. It is ways that the body can be cut to study anatomy. Also, if we're looking at an x-ray of a patient or a CAT scan of a patient, we may describe sort of the slices that we're viewing as a plane, and what type of plane is that. So here are some of the planes that we could use. The sagittal plane divides the body into right and left parts, and more specifically, mid-sagittal or medial divides the body into equal left and right parts. Frontal or coronal divides the body into an anterior section and a posterior section, and transverse or cross section divides the body into superior and inferior parts. A CAT scan often looks at the body in this type of plane, the transverse plane. Let's chat about patient positioning. Often our patients are in the supine position. Sometimes if a patient has severe lung disease called ARDS, we will position them in the prone position. Many of our patients are positioned in the semi-Fowler's position, which is considered to be between 30 and 45 degree angle when we compare the upper body to the lower body. The high Fowler's position is between 60 and 90 degree angle, basically sitting pretty much upright. Trendelenburg's position has the patient's head a little bit lower than the rest of the body. That is sometimes used when the patient has low blood pressure. The body has some body cavities. The dorsal body cavity is more posterior. It's made up of the cranial cavity and the spinal cavity. The ventral body cavity is more anterior. It's made up of the thoracic cavity, there's a diaphragm below that, and then the abdominal pelvic cavity. The abdominal pelvic cavity can then be divided into the abdominal cavity and the pelvic cavity. The thoracic cavity is a very important part of our body. It is superior to the diaphragm, so we know it's above the diaphragm, and it has organs like the heart, the lungs, and it also has the trachea, and it has some great vessels. It's protected by the rib cage. The abdominal pelvic cavity is below the diaphragm, and we think of it as an abdominal cavity and a pelvic cavity, even though there's no physical structure that actually separates them, interestingly. The abdominal cavity contains a lot of the gastrointestinal system, including the stomach, liver, and a few other organs, and the pelvic cavity contains a lot of the reproductive organs. If you have a patient that arrives in the emergency department complaining of abdominal pain, what we would like to do is be able to identify where exactly that pain is occurring and then be able to write it in the patient's chart so that the next clinician that comes in to see them understands where the pain is. The following divisions allow us to do that. So we have 4 quadrants or 9 regions that we could use for identifying areas of the abdominal pelvic cavity. In this case, we're labeling quadrants of the abdomen and we're using the navel as our guide, our midpoint. Here we are identifying 9 regions of the abdominal pelvic area. And for example, if a patient presented in the emergency department with severe pain in the right iliac or inguinal region or in the hypogastric or pubic region, we may be suspicious that they have appendicitis because we know that the appendix is in that area. If everything is going well in your body, you are going to be maintaining homeostasis or balance. It means that we keep things like calcium levels within a certain range. They're going to vary up a little bit and go down a little bit, but they're going to be within a range. pH will be the same thing, and your body temperature will be the same. So we call it homeostasis. If we lose homeostasis and we have a disturbance in that, then we are in disease. It results in disease, and many of our patients are not able to maintain homeostasis. The main controlling ways that we do this with our body is through the nervous system and the endocrine system. The nervous system uses neurons, and the endocrine system uses hormones. The way that homeostasis or balance is maintained in our body is that we have receptors that recognize changes in the environment. For example, perhaps your calcium is too high. That information is sent along an afferent pathway to a control center like the brain, which is able to analyze this data and compare it to what the desired level of calcium is. And then information goes out through the efferent pathway to make a change in the body in order to correct the deviation from normal. Negative feedback is the main way that homeostasis is maintained. It works exactly like the thermostat and heater in a room. If the temperature gets high in a room, the thermostat is able to recognize that, detect that change, and make a decision to tell the heater to turn off. We see the same phenomenon again. This is a negative feedback system in to maintain homeostasis. Number one, there's a stimulus. There's an imbalance in something, pH or calcium, like I say. There's a receptor that's able to detect that change. And then there's an afferent pathway that sends this information up to the control center, which might be the brain. Then a decision is made, and then there's an efferent pathway or output that sends information out to an effector, which should be able to make a correction so that the deviation is fixed. Positive feedback mechanisms are extremely rare in the body, and this is like building a snowman where you're just adding more and more snow, or a snowball effect. So the more the deviation occurs, the more strong the stimulus is to make the deviation even further from normal. The best example is in the birth of a baby, when the stretching of the uterus causes more contractions, which causes more stretching and movement, which causes more contractions.